Hello, welcome to Bedtime Stories with Milan Homola. I'm only half joking, but here we are next to the fire, and we thought it would be fun to have me read through a bit of and highlight the annual report 2020 edition from Compassion Connect. Now, I know annual report doesn't sound like a great bedtime reading, but this contains stories and pictures, and for anyone who loves bedtime stories that have great narrative and great pictures, you're in for a treat. And again, we just thought it'd be fun to have me read through and highlight some of this so that you're not just looking through it by yourself. And we start here with a key question. We love to ask a tough question. And as we know from 2020, there were a whole lot of questions, not a lot of answers. And we felt the same way. But this question always sticks with us, regardless of the circumstances we face. And that is, what would happen if local churches, if followers of Jesus came together, united in their own neighborhood to love and serve the people that are right in their own backyard? And then what would it look like, how to do that in the midst of a pandemic? Well, let's turn the page and see a little bit of what this looks like from 2020. Just as sort of a refresher, our mission is that we bring churches together to serve their neighbors. And this vision, the compelling vision that we aim for, that's on the horizon, is that we see a world where churches and individuals everywhere, they choose unity over division and compassion over complacency. And then over here on this page, you've got this really good looking guy that wrote a really nice letter that I really encourage you to read. But this is just something I spent a lot of time and heart on trying to communicate just some of what I was feeling in 2020 that I don't think is that different from what you felt in 2020, and point out the fact that there was tons of just uncertainty and discomfort, but reminding myself and reminding us that that's not all bad, that a lot of times uncertainty and discomfort can awaken new things in the soul, can shake off old dirty chains. And so I know I've experienced that. And I also point out the inspiring work of the volunteers and the donors who, in a time that the world would say, hey, there's a pandemic going on, you need to isolate, you need to think about yourself. We saw all of our volunteers and the donors who were saying the opposite of, hey, we need to press in, we need to support the overlooked and the hurting and the forgotten in our neighborhoods are even more so in the midst of a pandemic when everyone's isolating and everyone's thinking about self. So check this out. It's also kind of a bit of a call to the future where we believe in the midst of uncertainty and confusion, there's a call to patient endurance. That's what our world needs to see. That's what the church is called to. And so it's an invitation to see this not as how fast can we get out of it, but how can we grow a heart of patient, humble, compassionate endurance in the midst of it. And for those of you, if you weren't paying attention 30 seconds ago, here's a visual on what Compassion Connect does. What are we about? We really want to unite the people of God to serve and love their neighbors. So here's Compassion Connect. What do? We work with churches, inspiring and equipping. And what are churches? They're communities made up of individual followers of Jesus who want to come together. And so we gather these churches to love and serve their neighbors. We help people of faith who want to put their faith into practice. How do we do that? Where do we do that? In these models, compassion clinics in neighborhoods all over the place, and a compassion care center model that is brilliantly advancing and working powerfully through COVID down in Arizona, and design studios where we're mentoring boys and girls away from sexual exploitation, and the bridal dress shops that are raising awareness and funds to fight that battle that the church needs to fight against sexual exploitation. And here, these are the 7 core values. So this is just that sort of foundational visual page. Here's an amazing timeline, right? I have a degree in history. History people have to love timelines, so this is one of my favorite pages. We know everything shut down around March, right? There were a couple clinics that happened right before the shutdown, and then it shut down, and I'm super proud of the team we gathered together. We weren't pulling our hair out. We were just saying, how do our values inform the way we walk forward in these uncertain times? And the first thing was right away, our clinic teams, both in Arizona and Portland, realized we need to get the PPE that we have sitting around in storage. We need to get it to our partnering hospitals who are running out. And so we did that. We got rid of all that stuff, donated it to them. In June, July, right, we were facing the deepening issues of isolation. And as it related to design studio, boys and girls, one just heartwarming story was the graduation of some of the girls who had been with the design studio for years. This is a great picture. And Onai graduated, and she just has some warm things to say about how participating in design studio really helped build her confidence, help her see just how beautiful and valuable she is as a person, which brings about honoring self and honoring others, which is battling sexual exploitation. And then in September, we had our newly led team in the Puget Sound region launch their first ever compassion clinic in the midst of a pandemic. This is the first clinic team to do that. And so it was pretty amazing that a community that had never done a clinic launched it in the midst of COVID, did it very safe, very well, no problems, tons of excitement generated, and witnessing the power of unity and compassion. That this year there's going to be 3 different communities throughout Puget Sound doing compassion clinics. Here's a deeper dive into the compassion clinics, right? Again, it's churches uniting in their own neighborhood to be the church, to provide health and hope in the midst of a pandemic. We saw just a real downturn. Obviously, we couldn't do large scale clinic events, but we continued to reach out and hear from guests about the value of when these clinics had happened earlier in 2020 and when they would restart later in 2020, about just how valued they felt, because those who are slipping through the cracks of the healthcare system before COVID were dramatically impacted by COVID and the shutdown. And then you have job losses, and all of that leads to deeper cracks in the healthcare system that the church is very capable of stepping into at a front lines level and help them plug into systems beyond the one-day compassion clinics. One number here I just want to read for you and point out that stood out to me was that 53% of guests surveyed at clinics said that they were uninsured. Now, the reason that stands out is because you can compare it to the US adult percentage survey that is 10% of US adults are uninsured, and yet 53% of guests that are showing up at clinics are uninsured. So that shows that the compassion clinics are reaching the difficult neighborhoods where they don't have the access. They need something like this that is a front lines access point to just getting in the door to see a doctor or a dentist. So I'm very proud of that. Here's just another kind of summary of the total year on the clinics. Take a look at those numbers. A lot of community impact, even though we had about 1/3 the number of clinic outreaches that we would typically have in a year. So even in the face of those challenges, you still have these great volunteers that are stepping out at their own risk to safely volunteer in a clinic environment. We're very proud of that. Here's another kind of one of those for numbers metrics people. We entered into a great project with Mission Increase called Project Impact. And we basically asked a tough question of ourselves. And, are we seeing the values lived out, those core values that I pointed to? And we asked it through the lens of a compassion clinic. Is the model really working? One thing I'll read here and point out for you is this pie chart over here, where we were surveying the key clinic volunteers, those who are planning it. They're kind of the all-star volunteers. They give so much beyond just a one day of volunteering, and asked them, what does this mean to you? What is this helping you experience when you volunteer in a compassion clinic? And we had 87% of those volunteers say that because they were involved in a compassion clinic, they are more connected to the body of Christ in their own neighborhood because they participated. And so that's a really important value for us, is to know that followers of Jesus, because they're volunteering, are now seeing the beauty, the diversity, and the breadth of the body of Christ in their own neighborhood. And if they didn't participate in the clinic, that beautiful connection wouldn't be happening. Here's a bit of our anti-exploitation efforts. This is the design studio and the bridal shops that are doing tons of great work to absolutely essential fight against the darkness of sexual exploitation. And here I'm just so proud of the volunteers, you all that continue to press in when you couldn't gather as groups like you normally would for mentoring. You pressed in and did virtual mentoring. You showed up at individual doors to drop off bags of goodies and crafts. The one stat here I want to point out is that 73% of youth that participated, they agreed or strongly agreed that they feel more confident in themselves. They believe in themselves more because they participate in a design studio, which just is, we believe wholeheartedly, it's showing that we honor them as individuals, that they feel honored, they see the dignity and value that is inherent within their own created in the image of God being, and then that equips them to battle against, avoid sexual exploitation in the way that predators go after those who don't have the confidence, who don't have that support structure around them. And in the midst of COVID, this was elevated. You know, it's hard enough for teenagers, boys and girls, with the online environment, the access to phone, all of that stuff. But in COVID, it was dramatically increased. The risk factors because of increase in online predators, increases in abuse and domestic issues, addictions. Those are all things that can lead to greater numbers of sexually exploited. And what we see here is that 87% of youth who were surveyed agreed or strongly agreed that I felt fully supported and loved by my design studio mentors during COVID. So that's another number that just points to the fact that these volunteers are doing an amazing thing. When everything says isolate, take care of yourself, focus on yourself, they were pressing in to the youth who really needed it the most. Teenagers suffered a lot throughout COVID and will continue to. The ramifications are unknown. Here's sort of a summary, a story that I want to point out here is this: how volunteers saved Thanksgiving for one family. There was a family connected to the design studio that, you know, they were really sick with COVID, family members that were sick with COVID. They had to cancel their plans to visit relatives. And a group of volunteers at their own initiative basically designed a Thanksgiving dinner for them and, you know, sacrificed their own time, their own energy. It impacted their own celebration of Thanksgiving, but they did that to love on a family and help them experience Thanksgiving in the midst of COVID. So I'm very proud of those volunteers and appreciate these sort of stories that help us see just how much volunteers can make a difference in the lives of others in their own neighborhood. Here's another visual for those who need a good a visual experience. Love the great picture. And here's just a picture to see what does it look like. These epicenters that are growing and expanding across the country. This is what's going on in those epicenters. Very proud of the fact that we have regional leaders who are building amazing volunteer teams. And now we have this network that are sharing best practices back and forth. What started in Little Rockwood outside of Portland is now inspiring leaders in other parts of the country. And I love being part of that group. I'm actually reading you this bedtime story next to the fire because outside it's 0 degrees. I'm here in Minnesota. So enjoy whatever weather you're experiencing because I'm pretty certain it's not 0 wherever you're at right now. And what good story doesn't have a call to action to make a difference? And that's what you're seeing here is we'd love to just highlight opportunities, ways for you to step in, to get involved, to continue participating in this movement of unity and compassion. One that I want to highlight is just very relevant to the times we find ourselves in, is the divisiveness, the hatred, the animosity on social media. What I'm asking you to do is just join with us on social media. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram because we're sharing stories of hope. We're sharing stories of self-sacrifice where volunteers are doing amazing things to love their neighbors and unite together. We're sharing stories about the power of collaboration. And so join with us and help share a better narrative on social media. And here we come to the numbers part. So if you haven't fallen asleep in the bedtime story, now is your time to fall asleep with the numbers. Or I know some of you who are watching this, you love the numbers. One number I'm going to point out for you is this one right down here is 1.7 million in total value of 2020 impact. And so that's a compelling number. That's the amount of impact, health, mentoring, the volunteer hours, the value provided to the communities is phenomenal in a year that a lot of stuff was shut down. And the one thing that I want to point out and just deeply appreciate is that this is so much more than a number. This represents so many volunteers who, again, when everything's said, isolate, focus on yourself, our volunteers were saying, you know what, we can safely step out and care for those who are overlooked and forgotten and bring love and compassion where there is division and animosity. And so this is so much more than a number. And I'll just wrap up with a little bit of this quote over here from Connie, a good friend. She's been with us for years as a donor, a monthly donor, makes such a difference in this mission. And she's been doing it for years. And what she points out, I take as just a personal encouragement. She says, you know what, for years I've been with Compassion Connect and they don't change their mission and their vision. They remain true. And that doesn't mean we don't adjust, right? 2020 was this year of pivoting, and innovation is a core value of ours. But we remain true to who we are. We unite churches to love and serve their neighbors as an expression of the love of Jesus. And she reminds us, calls us to that great passage, that statement by Jesus when he says, I tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. And that's about the volunteers and the donors who did works of sacrifice with their hands, with their time, with their generosity and financial giving to really show that we care for the least of these, that we're partnering in our communities, that we want to see healthy thriving in all neighborhoods. And that's the work of the church in the world. And so we're just inviting you into that, as this quote, one of my favorites, this is how we display love, that we would love one another. And that's going to have an impact in a world that is hungry for a better narrative, a better way. And so I'm inviting you into that. In the description below, you can click the link, you can read the full report, you can get it yourself. It'll take you to sign up for the newsletter, whatever. I'm just inviting you to continue taking this journey of unity and compassion with me and thousands of others around the country and around the world. Thank you for joining me for this bedtime story reading of the annual report 2020.